2 weeks ago, Hurricane Maria made landfall onto Puerto Rico, causing catastrophic damage to the mainland. After the storm had passed, 3.5 million citizens were without power and clean water. There are very little resources, forcing citizens to stand in multiple-mile lines to get things like gas, food, water, and medical supplies. Private citizens of the United States have started sending supplies such as generators to get the island back on some kind of power grid. Even with this help, however, it's going to take the island years to rebuild. San Juan's Mayor Carmen Cruz has come on several different programs asking for help from the United States, hoping for the same treatment for the island as was seen in Florida and Texas. This hope stemmed from the fact that Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, making it legally part of the United States and Puerto Rican citizens. The fact that they are a territory also means that other countries are not permitted to interfere with it. It means that no matter how much pleading for help that they do to other countries, the U.S. still has to ultimately have the final say. The situation is horrible not only because of this, but how it's affecting its citizens. And many say it's terrible because of how President Trump seems to be dealing with this situation. Trump was late in responding to it, saying that from many people that he should have removed the Jones Sheriff Act, a week earlier so that the country could receive help. He is also claiming that Cruz is simply wanting help for her country and is not trying to help them herself. Trump went to Puerto Rico today and met with the emergency officials and leaders there. He talked to all of them, but some people are upset about some of the seemingly tongue-in-cheek comments that he made. Take a look.
Now, I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack because we've spent a lot of money on Puerto Rico, and that's fine. We've saved a lot of lives. If you look at every death is a horror, but if you look at a real catastrophe like Katrina, and you look at the tremendous hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that died, and you look at what happened here with really a storm that was just totally overpowering. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. Now, what is your death count as of this moment? 17?
16 certified.
16 people certified. 16 people versus in the thousands. You can be very proud of all of your people, all of our people working together. 16 versus literally thousands of people.
So, Micah, I think I'm going to start with you and ask you this first question. How do you feel like the situation has been handled overall? Could it have been done better? Could there have been more done in general? What do you feel?
I really think that we, as Americans, that the government dropped the ball. I feel like there should have been a quicker response. Obviously, yes, things were bad in Texas, things were bad in Florida, still are.
Yes.
But I really feel, and I just was watching it and listening to news reports on the radio and on TV, that it seemed like the need for restoring power, getting water to these people. I mean, getting their airport back and running, which has basically happened only in the last few days, was really put on the back burner. And I hate to say that, it seems like, it's like this attitude that the White House had of like, well, there's this island off here, we'll get to them eventually. It's kind of the attitude it felt like. And even Trump, prior to his press conference today, ridiculing the mayor of San Juan and just saying, wait a minute, you're making this like a big deal when it's not. You should do more. When people were out, literally neighbors helping neighbors, clearing the roads, helping each other out, trying to find food. I mean, literally rinsing the mud off of bags of potato chips so they could have food to eat. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I have lots of friends who have family in Puerto Rico. They were telling me on Facebook, they were like, we have never seen anything like this. This is worse than Katrina because their nation is so small. They don't have a huge emergency management agency like we would have here in Tennessee or even the nation for that matter. FEMA shows up, they show up and they go camp out in the local hotels. They weren't out on the streets. They weren't really doing anything. So I really think that we did. It was really just pitiful what the federal government did for these people.
Well, do you guys have any comments on this?
No,
I want to be able to hear your voice
I'm just
as well.
really glad that you said the federal government, because my biggest issue with this entire thing is that many people have been putting this on President Trump. And my issue with that is that everybody wants to talk about it like saying he never came out, he didn't come out soon enough, Well, over and over again, we saw him come out for the different hurricanes, which gosh, it seems like there's too many to count at this point, and it's ridiculous with how many places we've seen just get torn to pieces. But that being said, I think it's so funny how people get so upset that President Trump tweets the way that he does, and they're not happy that he chooses that as a platform to get out what he's thinking right then and there. Well, if he waits a day or two to tweet about Puerto Rico, he is all of a sudden the worst president that has ever happened to Twitter. And I get that there's only been a couple.
He's busy tweeting about the NFL. It's like, what are you doing? We got people who don't have food. I mean, come on.
But it's like, but do you think that he necessarily has to tweet about Puerto Rico for him to actually be in the background doing things?
That's not what the problem was here. The problem was here he didn't remove the Jones Act until a full week after the hurricane hit, and they had already felt this devastation.
Yeah, well,
that's what this problem was.
And my take on this, I can kind of agree with both sides. Like Micah brought up, he's out there tweeting about the NFL, but at the same time, the media is out there covering the NFL, not covering Puerto Rico. So, all of a sudden they want to come out and say, oh, President Trump, he's this horrible person because he's not worrying about Puerto Rico. But at the same time, they really weren't either. Yeah. As far as the Jones Act goes and getting the, the FEMA money to them, I mean, it literally does for, a play on words, take an act of Congress for that to happen. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like we've talked about in the last segment, our Congress is pretty much at gridlock right now, and it's sad to say, but it's not going to just happen at the snap of a finger for those actions to happen.
Since we're talking about, since you brought up the Take a Knee protests through the NFL, do you feel like it's in the media and in the federal government, both, not just, President Trump, has it been talked about enough? Has any of this been talked about enough that's happened in Puerto Rico? The fact that they still don't have fresh water supply, or all citizens at least don't, that the fact that the hospitals aren't all up and running yet?
No, I mean, I don't think Puerto Rico has been talked about enough. Like you said, though the Jones Act does prohibit a lot of other countries from bringing in their ships to Puerto Rico, the Jones Act is actually what gives Puerto Ricans U.S. citizenship, and it set up the form of government that they have now. They have a congressional representative in Congress, and then they have a governor that kind of is like their president, I guess you could say. But I don't think that, I'm not saying that, Trump is, daisies and roses, but at the same time, I don't, in this situation, I don't think that it is solely his fault either that it hasn't been talked about.
I felt like it was adding insult to injury when he criticizes the leadership there, when these people are in such a desperate situation with no cell phone service, no water, very little food, if any, like I said, covered with mud or whatever. It just seemed like very unpresidential to me for him to take that sort of stance. I mean, I think in the very beginning, he should have said, we support you, Puerto Rico. We will get to you as soon as we can. Mm-hmm. Instead of attacking them and being hurtful, that to me just was not good. That comes
with a man like him. I hate to say that, but it is the expectation. And although it's not presidential, he's never been presidential. And that's just how it works. I don't think that because he's not presidential means that he's not capable of making positive things in the presidency happen. He's certainly changed it, that's for sure. But my expectations for him are not to come out and be sentimental in every aspect, because that's not who he is, and it's never been who he is. Although it may not be right in many cases, especially this one. The government did fail in many ways to get there as quickly as they should have. That being said, it is really tough to say with how many things have happened before Puerto Rico. They are all over the place right now, and our country is dealing with things that the news is 24/7, and it may be about kneeling during the national anthem, and it should be about Houston, Florida, Puerto Rico, Vegas. We're just, it's so many, it's too many to count at this point.
I think you bring up a good point, and then we need to talk about this, about agenda setting, what the media is covering and what they choose to cover. Remember, guys, we have only basically a handful of corporations own most of the media that we watch.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, and we are very fortunate that we here can look at a variety of not just those big, huge conglomerates, if you will, and also look at independent organizations and see what really is happening. But that's the unfortunate fact of that, is we have that, huge problem with the agenda setting where we just have this, mass following of just whatever the big thing is on the pike.
And I think we can all at this point agree that there has been a failure through the media and through the federal government to cover this. And so I want to take this to you, Christian, and I want to ask you, there have been celebrities that have come out and helped Puerto Rico. One example of this would be Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is a Puerto Rican, and he raised money for this the whole situation, and he gave it to the Red Cross, to FEMA. And do you think that because of this, that celebrities are helping more than the federal government is?
In a way, I want to say, and then another way, absolutely, because although the difference, though, here's my biggest thing about that question: celebrities get to pick and choose. They get to choose where they help. Those same celebrities may have had nothing to do with the Houston help. They may have had nothing to do with the Florida help, but because they had Puerto Rican ties, they could send their private jets over there, and they could send all that food and water. In a way, I do think they have. I think they're a little more capable as well in terms of how simple it was for them to just say, Puerto Rico, let's go. The U.S. government probably has that capability as well, but they've had a lot of focus in a lot of different places. Celebrities get to pick and choose, like J.J. Watt, for example. Raising, I think, $37 million was where he topped it off. His original goal was $200,000. Okay, that's strictly for Houston. Nothing has come out saying that that's going to anywhere else, but because that celebrity plays for that football team, and that is what he calls home, that goes to Houston, and he gets to pick and choose that. The federal government doesn't step in and say, no, stop, we're going to spread your money, So I do think celebrities have played a huge role, but I can't say whether or not it's more than the federal government.
Well, don't you think it's regulation too? The lawmakers have those regulations which sort of, tie them,
It's
from
just like
being
with the
able to
Congress.
do, right, exactly.
Right. Well,
So-
and something that we need, you're talking about regulation, something we need to bring up is that a lot of these natural disasters are going on when just a couple of weeks ago, the government had to decide whether they were going to raise the debt ceiling,
Right.
and the whole budget situation was going on.
crazy, yeah.
And so, when you have a situation like that, and then this happens at the same time, you're having to decide, well, how much money are we now going to include in the budget extra for FEMA that we hadn't already planned? And so, that's going to affect how much we're going to raise the debt ceiling. Are we going to raise the debt ceiling, or are we going to shut down the government?
And I do feel like this is where a lot of people got confused with what Trump was saying when he was in Puerto Rico today, because he did make the comment that was slightly tongue-in-cheek of, you've messed up our budget a little bit, but that's fine. And I really don't think he was meaning this in a negative way. I feel like it was possibly the wrong way to say it, but in my opinion, I feel like what he was trying to say is, as a businessman, he looks at budget before he looks at anything else. And I mean, if we can talk about President Trump enough, we can talk about how he is a businessman before anything else. And he was just trying to show that I think that was his way of showing remorse almost, and that our budget is messed up. We weren't expecting 3 hurricanes to hit the mainland of America and Puerto Rico all at the same time, and this is something we are trying to fix as of right now. Of course, he could have come out and said it in a more eloquent way, but we have to also, like Christian always likes to remind me, he is not a presidential president.
No.
Well, he could still have some sensitivity.
In the traditional
You're right, but I
You
do think that was his version of comic relief, though. You've messed up our budget, thanks a lot. A lot of people would say, wrong place, wrong time. And you read that in an article, and the first thing you think is, wow, that's awful. And then you watch him say it, and he says it with a smile on his face, and the guy next to him goes, ha ha. It may still be wrong place, wrong time.
Meanwhile, I'm cringing. I'm just like,
I feel like everyone in that situation could have been cringing, and I feel like, again, a lot of people will agree that that was the wrong thing to say to a group of people who all just lost everything. And that more than likely won't get any of it back for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and meanwhile their infrastructure is messed up, their hospitals are messed up, their schools. I mean, this is not a rich country, guys. No. It's going to take a long time to rebuild this. So it's like we're in for the long haul here.
And that's another thing to talk about. There's a lot of background that goes to this story, and that, like Micah talked about, their infrastructure was not great in the first place before the hurricane even hit. And the territory was hugely in debt, And so I think that's another factor that Trump had to take into consideration.
And I mean, we can also put into that, though it was not his company, Trump does have a name in Puerto Rico. His name was on a company that went bankrupt and partially bankrupt that entire country. And while I will say that I know for a fact that that was not his company, his name was just on it to try to save it and give it face, but that's still something people are going to remember for as long as we're going to talk about Puerto Rico, is that his name was on something that helped bankrupt that country. And so that's something that's going to be a problem moving forward, I feel like.
Well, Don't get me wrong. Each one of these segments could definitely last all day long. But that being said, there is one that has been all over the place recently, and Mason, well, you brought it up. You brought it up, and I think it's your turn to take this one into a little more depth with taking a knee.
I think what we're going to do is go to commercial break before we get onto this topic, because I have a feeling that we're probably going to be discussing it for a little while, as it has been in the news for at least 2 weeks, if not more. So we will be right back after this commercial break.